Dreamweavers welcomes you to another in its series of videos about relating to your dreams. On this tape, we focus on the men in men's dreams. We will explore some of the most common themes in men's dreams. For example, a man's relationship to the masculine principle itself, to Phalos, his relationship to the father, to the shadow, both its positive and negative aspects, to the archetypal pattern of eternal youth and its opposite, the wise old man. Artists have depicted these themes from dreams and fantasies throughout the ages, so during our discussion we will show you some of these pictures. Dr. Alan Kane, a Jungian analyst practicing in Santa Monica and Los Angeles, joined me for a discussion of some of these patterns that occur in men's dreams. Let's talk about men's relationship to the masculine itself. What about, how does that appear in dreams?
Well, obviously it's a very big topic these days. I think people are trying to figure out ways to even know what it means to be masculine or feminine, and everybody has an opinion about that. But I think from a Jungian point of view, it's always amazed me that Jung's very first dream as a small child of about 3 or 4, as he presented it in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, his biography, is really about the whole issue of a symbol of the masculine in terms of a phallus that he saw underground. It's an amazing dream.
I discovered a dark rectangular stone-lined hole in the ground. I had never seen it before. I ran forward curiously and peered down into it. Then I saw a stone stairway leading down. Hesitantly and fearfully I descended. I saw before me in the dim light a rectangular chamber about 30 feet long. On a platform in the center of a red carpet stood a wonderfully rich golden throne. It was a magnificent throne, a real king's throne in a fairy tale. Something was standing on it, which I thought at first was a tree trunk 12 to 15 feet high and about 1.5 to 2 feet thick. It was a huge thing reaching almost to the ceiling. But it was one of a curious composition. It was made of skin and naked flesh, and on the top there was something like a rounded head with no face and no hair. On the very top of the head was a single eye, gazing motionless upward. The thing did not move, yet I had a feeling that it might at any moment crawl off the throne like a worm and creep toward me. I was paralyzed with terror. At that moment I heard from outside and above me my mother's voice. She called out, "Yes, just look at him. This is the man-eater." That intensified my terror still more, and I woke sweating and scared to death.
That dream still holds such mystery to hear it again, doesn't it? Yeah. It has so many layers of perhaps personal material and archetypal material. But this image of the penis itself as, that's a woman's doing it right. The penis itself,
15 feet high.
Right, is such an important issue, and evidently that often occurs in men's dream of some kind of experience of the penis.
Yes,
right.
Whether it's literal or biological or some kind of symbolic thing like a stone or a figure or statuary, whatever. Yes.
Right. I was so impressed years ago in Greece that there are just everywhere these little statues of the Ithyphalic god where the penises are very, very long, and a man has to go to a great deal of effort to hold his member. One in Pompeii that's pretty famous is the owner of the house standing by the door, and he even has a harness made to hold up his large penis.
Yes.
And I assume that means that at that time there was a real need for the development of this kind of masculine energy and creative energy in the culture to move them out of the matriarchy. Right?
Yeah, I think the whole issue, I mean, we talk about potency, and we're talking about the potential of something. In this case, I think in Jung's dream, or in that period in Greek history, the potential for some new development, some new possibilities, symbolized by that kind of phallic representation, I think is very much a part of this. And I think what scared Jung at some level was the idea of how can I live up to that kind of image? I'm 3 or 4 years old, and how big must this appear to me? And the task of becoming a person for any of us, but in this case a male person, does have to do with coming to some kind of terms with that part of our structure biologically, physiologically, which is unique to our gender. And so that we spend our lives coming into different encounters, different stages of development with ways in which, if you will, archetypal patterns with which the masculine has manifested itself throughout history. And I think Jung's absolutely right when he talks about an archetypal pattern, when we talk about certain ways in which the man is confronted with being the hero, the sort of Tarzan figure, or the gunslinger or whatever. And another way of thinking about it, it would be someone who is more developed either in a romantic sense like a poet, or in an active sense like a Hemingway, that there's another stage of development there.
A kind of literary, a man of words.
Yes, a man of words
right.
in that sense. And then you have like the political figure, the great political leader out in the world, a Churchill or a Kennedy or a Roosevelt, that we give this kind of quality to. And then you have more of the kind of spiritual figure like a Gandhi, who,
a sage, a quieter kind of pattern.
Yes, much more, less dramatic in that sense, but still very, very powerful. And then there are the books by, now I'm going to go blank on his name, on the warrior and the lover and the king and the magician. And I think that's Robert Moore out of Chicago.
Right.
And again, these are like classic patterns of development, and how does a man come to terms with those?
I have seen more than one dream in which men, both young and old, are asked to somehow to relate to the phalos itself. For example, I remember one dream a relatively young man had, of being in a large gathering, a conference of men, in which none of the men wore clothes, and they were each asked to look at, inspect, and touch the other's penises, to really pay attention to the phalos itself, not sexually, but just to pay attention to it, almost in a worshipful manner. Another way a dream can invite a man into relationship with the masculine is in sometimes disturbing dreams of a man making love, having a sexual relationship with another man, or loving another man. Sometimes these dreams might be about actual homosexual attraction, but on the other hand, more often than not, they're dreams that compensate for a man's lack of relatedness to masculinity itself, and they invite him to get closer to, identify with, come in touch with his own masculinity. Also, they're initiatory dreams for men, where a man is either invited into a larger tribe of men, a group of older men of some kind, or in a negative way, he might be pursued by, chased, killed, hurt in some way by a group of men, inviting the ego into finding his own personal identity within the collective masculine image, into masculinity itself. Coming to grips with being a man in this century is no small task, and dreams are often very, very helpful.
What about issues of extroversion and introversion? And if I'm a very active kind of guy, is that different than if I'm a more reflective kind of guy? Is that an acceptable model?
So if you're a particularly active, extroverted kind of guy, you might have, for an example, a dream about a fellow guy who's pretty quiet, or some man from the Orient, or an Indian man who's down by the river meditating or something, right? That the dream image...
I think that's very true. It's like I can think of two examples. One would be, again, in Jung's own biography, his dream about Siegfried. And the need for Siegfried to die. There's a great heroic figure.
I was with an unknown brown-skinned man, a savage, in a lonely Rocky Mountain landscape. It was before dawn, the eastern sky was already bright, and the stars fading. Then I heard Siegfried's horn sounding over the mountain, and I knew that we had to kill him. We were armed with rifles and lay in wait for him on a narrow path over the rocks. Then Siegfried appeared, high up on the crest of the mountain in the first ray of the rising sun. On a chariot made of the bones of the dead, he drove at furious speed down the precipitous slope. When he turned a corner, we shot him, and he plunged down, struck dead.
So this death of a hero, like the killing of Siegfried, heralds something in a man's ego development?
Yes, I think in Jung's case, it's if you have a classic situation where he is with a shadow figure, this savage, this brown-skinned savage, something that is much more primitive, as contrasted with Siegfried, who was a very idealized Germanic Teutonic hero. And that I think Jung, in his own development, had to struggle with whether or not he was going to go a path that would take him into worldly fame and success in a more traditional manner, the heroic path of that kind, or make an alliance with someone who was less obviously appealing, which I think he did, and then proceeded to live his life out of that format. But I think also there's a way in which it's the appeal of the extroverted world that Siegfried really was. The dramatic, extroverted kind of hero, and this other guy's very unlikely. But I think if you look at Jung's life, his whole orientation was, although I think he had the option, I think he probably could have been very successful in the outer world, and in some level over a period of time chose not to as he pursued this inner path.
So this alternate figure in a dream, Jung called the shadow, which is often a figure in a man's dream that is characterized by something very opposite to the dreamer's image of himself.
Well, certainly the idea that as we develop our own identity, that we identify of all the possibilities we have to develop, there's only so many that we can do. So we pick certain ones that we think are acceptable. They can be positive or negative by the world standards, we don't care. But what we think is marketable or acceptable or going to get us someplace in life, those are the ones we develop. And the ones we don't develop fall into what Jung called the shadow. These are all my capacities as a male person that I don't have any room for or I'm threatened by. I can't be too aggressive because mom will be mad at me and dad will be mad at me. On the other hand, I can't be too poetic because mom will be mad at me and dad will be mad at me. So whatever goes in there is something that has a capacity for development in me if I could give it time and energy, but I can't give time and energy to all the possibilities, and of course some of them are mutually exclusive. So in this case, I think Jung had to make a decision. I mean, quite literally a decision. I think he remakes it over a period of time. But the decision to be more extroverted or more introverted, for example, would be part of that. So then what's going to show up in the dream frequently is what hasn't been dealt with. There's a dream I know in the wonderful book, Man and His Symbols, talking about a more introverted choice, and this has to do with a young man who dreams about a French criminal.
A man is lying on a couch and has pulled the cover over his face. He is a Frenchman, a desperado who would take on any criminal job. An official is accompanying me downstairs, and I know that a plot has been made against me, namely that the Frenchman should kill me as if by chance. That is how it would look from the outside. He actually sneaks up behind me when we approach the exit, but I am on guard. A tall, portly man, rather rich and influential, suddenly leans against the wall beside me, feeling ill. I quickly grab the opportunity to kill the official by stabbing his heart. Now I am safe, for the Frenchman won't attack me, since the man who gave him his orders is dead.
So if one had such a dream, you would do associations, personal associations with the Frenchman, with the official, and with the portly man. And substituting these associations then would give you the qualities that that the dreamer needs to relate to, and the dream tells his reaction to those qualities in himself, right?
Yeah, the idea that the shadow material, shadow figures are good or bad per se is not the point, because they aren't. They're simply material that has, if you will, potential, and it has to do with what attitude the dreamer, the active person, takes toward that energy. And mostly the unconscious, if you will, but dreams and shadow figures in particular get cranky when they're ignored or misunderstood. That's when you get in trouble. If you give them some kind of attention, then usually you've got a better chance at figuring this all out.
And so in a dream, I remember Jung says somewhere that the unconscious turns toward the dreamer, the face that the dreamer turns toward the unconscious.
Yes, exactly.
So the relationship between the dreamer and the shadow figure can instruct the dreamer about how he's treating these qualities in himself, for example, right?
Yes.
So the shadow then would appear in men's dreams in many different forms as a way of compensating for his ego position, to help him correct what's left out of his notion of himself.
To expand it,
true?
because we have to take a one-sided point of view. You can't look in every direction at the same time. So mostly it's trying to make some kind of room for a more complete picture.
The shadow puts a man in touch with both his dark and his creative sides. For example, we know that Lucifer, Christ's shadow, as it were, was both the devil and the light bringer. Now let's see a man process a dream in which he works with a shadow figure.
It was a white sports car with me driving and my best friend sitting next to me, and then two more people in the back seat. And I kind of liked that one because it was the four, the quaternity.
Such a feeling of wholeness,
and the fact that my friend was next to me.
Yes.
And he's occurred in my dreams over the years. When I have dreams of male figures, it would be friends like him or other friends.
So talk about that a minute, Jim. What do you associate with that friend? What qualities does he carry for you?
Well, he's an extroverted, and I'm a very introverted individual, and we kind of complement each other based on that, and we've been friends over the years. He's very sensitive.
But when you have a dream then with this would be, in Jungian terms, called a positive shadow figure. He's somebody you really appreciate, right?
Sure.
And so when you have a dream that you're driving a car you like, a white sports car, with your friend beside you, that's really a lovely dream of integration, isn't it?
Yes, that's what I felt, especially with the four people in the car. Four is like a magic number in my dreams.
Yes, that it says you have all four corners operating together, right?
To have my friend with me would be like to be in touch with another side of my personality, too, because he often took that aspect of my own personality in our relationship, and he saved me from having to do it myself.
Yes,
so it was a easy
that in
thing
earlier
to do.
dreams he might have been driving the car and you're riding in the back seat or
I
something.
can't recall.
Yeah. Whatever those associations are, he substitutes for that person in the dream to get a feeling for what qualities.
Right, some perspective on those characteristics and how they might be speaking about him in this seemingly indirect manner as a way of getting a more complete picture of himself rather than just the one he has from his waking perspective, the one we all have from our waking perspective. And the idea that the dreams that we have are continually providing us with kind of course corrections in the way that Jung talked about they're compensatory or they're completing. I think they give us a chance to treat the unconscious respectfully as opposed to thinking of everything as threatening, that the material is mostly going to respond well if it's not ignored, and if it's unless it's ignored or misunderstood, then it turns a little more threatening to us. And if we can say, well, yeah, this is part of me too, may not like it, it may ask something of me I haven't wanted to do that's going to embarrass me or require me to do some work. A lot of shadow dreams, I think, for people are more positive than they would first appear, but they have to do with capacities that I have that I don't want to do the work to develop. So I may dream about a concert pianist, and I say, gee, I wish I could play the piano. Well, I can if I practice. Maybe not at a concert level, but it's easier to just complain.
But some development that we may have left out of our own sense of ourselves, right? The more friendly we are with the unconscious, the friendlier our dreams are likely to be.
I would,
to some extent.
I would go with respectful rather. I don't think you have to like this stuff. So it's not like you have to take your shadow to lunch, but I think you have to be respectful when it knocks on your door.
Right. And
listen to what it's trying to say.
And I know, particularly in women's dreams, that the whole feeling of being broken into, breaking in the house, or rape dreams are reflective of a woman's particular resistance to letting a certain idea in. I don't know that so much in men's dreams, but I would think killing or being chased by.
I think it's interesting, just as you were saying that, I never thought of this before, but the idea that I think frequently for women the idea is being intruded upon, being broken into. For a man, I think the issue is something going to be awakened in me that I'm going to have to give expression to? So there's that maybe side of it.
Yeah. So the shadow figures are the figures in our dreams who represent something in ourselves that we haven't yet developed or haven't yet been aware with, actually can help us expand our consciousness and expand our abilities in the world, right?
Yes, because we need access to all the possibilities to some degree. How many of them we can actually fulfill, of course, is limited because of time and space.
Right.
But the idea that we don't have to automatically exclude any of our potential.
And then it probably needs to be mentioned also that, like Jung's Siegfried dream, there are dreams that are at another level than personal. They are collective dreams. They're dreams that really foretell or lead toward an understanding of the whole culture moving in a certain direction, right? And those are called archetypal dreams.
Yeah, or big dreams.
Big dreams,
that shows up frequently. Jung had a number of those which are listed in that biography, including what he thought of later as a prediction of both World War I and then later actually of his mother's death.
Yeah, that's right. Let's talk about another figure that often appears in men's dreams, the father archetype. Alan and I spoke earlier about the father archetype and how difficult fathering is in our society. We will also return to this subject later in this tape.
Well, the whole issue of where the father is going to show up, I've told you the dream that I like the best to describe what men are struggling with is this image that a patient had of climbing out of a giant bird's nest with the mother holding onto his waist and the father stomping on his fingers as he climbs out.
Right.
And I think there is a way in which fathers frequently are experienced by their sons as not welcoming.
Yes.
They are not supportive and encouraging. And when it is frequently out of the father's own narcissistic needs. The father, it's like almost a caricature, the father who wants his son to be in sports, so because he never fulfilled his own sports dreams.
He gets to go to the football games, right?
Or the father who wants the son to follow in his footsteps but not get any bigger than he does. And I think one of the major issues for fathers is twofold. One is their own unmet needs to be initiated, welcomed into, valued as men.
Yes.
And on the other hand, the capacity to step aside when the time comes for the next generation to come in. And I have seen this over and over again. It's there's a Jungian analyst in Zurich whose name is blank on me at the moment, who does incredible talk about the history of psychoanalysis in terms of how the fathers all had trouble with their sons. Freud had trouble with Jung and Adler, and Jung had trouble with so-and-so, and then somebody else. And I think historically in psychoanalysis and in psychotherapy, it's been difficult for the next generation to come along and for the founding fathers, to get the hell out of the way.
Yeah, the father tends to want to stay institutionalized and rigid and guard the gate, as it were, instead of supporting the new development.
And I think what you're left with then is men who are stuck between either being good boys, and that really means kind of staying with the mother,
right, and
not confronting the father, or they become men and a kind of an aggressive cut-off from their feelings way. And then you're left with the dual image of either the kind of blow-em-up guy in the movies or somebody who's sort of Casper Milquetoasty Forrest Gumpy. Forrest Gump's a really kind of fun character, but he's not a model for men that I would recommend. So it's very difficult to find a way for men to look around and model themselves. And then, of course, we're left with the problem we don't talk to each other about it in the process.
Yeah, that men have difficulty talking to men.
Very limited images of how this could be. If I were going to make a lot of money, I would invent, manipulate and create a model for men to follow, and then market it. And I'd get rich.
How to be a good father.
How to be a good father.
Right,
how to be a good male.
Right. Yeah. What has happened, do you think, to the men's movement in which that effort was made? Like Robert Bly's notion was that perhaps the next stage is not so much a father but a mentor, right? Or was that?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's always a two-step process, because part of it does have to do with what kind of foundation I had with my mother.
Right.
And that still is. All
that
these
the
years
relationship with the mother colors the relationship with the father.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when they work together, I think you can see this almost any time there's any kind of healthy child growing up, the first element is almost guaranteed to be a strong mother. I mean, I think about Freud and Jung, for example, who both had very supportive mothers and somewhat problematic fathers. So of the two, I think that the mother is still the critical issue. You know, mom's still the ground we grow out of. What we do when we get a little bit more independent is very different. But the issue of like how the mother and father relate together, what do I see in their relationship that then can echo my own connection to myself? Do I see a couple out there that I can somehow model internally? And I think that's very rare. It's fun to, I mean, every now and then I meet people who've had that relationship where the mother and father really liked each other, you know, talked to each other, share things, and yet we're still able to include the kids. And the kids really benefit from that. So that's...
that there's a sense of wholeness and self-esteem when they're good enough parents, right? And then one doesn't have to get so compensatorily identified with the parent in one's own life either, right?
I was thinking about Jung's famous dream where he has his father appear to him, remember, and ask for advice on marriage counseling just before Jung's mother died. And he realized later that, you know, from his point of view, his father had come from the other side to get some help because he's now going to have to deal with this woman that he had been married with all his years, but he'd been dead so long, he didn't have to deal with her. Now he wanted to know what the latest marriage theories were.
Could he please help him before she got there, maybe, But there's that other dream that you and I were talking about earlier, about the dream in which Jung is like a father acting like a mother, right?
Yes, holding this this young woman in his arms in this big field of wheat, and he's almost godlike. And I think there is that way in which we do need huge figures in some way. I think probably the best model that I know something about for this kind of development of a male character is in some of the Southwest Indians. I know the other Indian tribes do that, but the idea that the child is taken, or the son is taken away from the women at a certain point and really immersed in his connection to the men as a collective, but then also sent out on an individual, say, vision quest. And begins to get his own name, and that's, you know, and when he comes out of that process, he's now a member of the tribe as an adult and not as a child anymore.
So that the fathers in the tribe actually support his individual, leaving the fathers and finding his own way and his own name.
And that it's done at a collective level. And when that works, I think it can be very healthy. I mean, I've had some experiences in my own growing up where groups of men in churches, elders and youth leaders and camp counselors and so on, provided an enormously supportive, caring, masculine, I mean, in the traditional sense of masculine, these were, you know, guys, you know, didn't have what so many men have suffered from, is like people in those roles who violated them. You know, priests who had sex with boys and so on, that would be very, I mean, just obviously horrendously betraying. But when it goes well, it also provides you with a sense of yourself that you don't get any other way.
So the father in a man's psychology can act like the grand old patriarch and in a way usurp the son's life for his own unlived life on one hand, or he can jealously guard the gate, right, to any power, right? Or if he acts in a really supportive way, he can really enhance the boy's relationship to the world, and he starts with a sense of entitlement.
He fosters that sense of value.
That the world is his oyster, right?
You know, there's no way my mother can tell me I'm a good man.
That's
Only
right.
my dad can tell me I'm a good man.
Really, that's true, isn't it?
And I think that's the key.
Jung gave an example in one volume of a young man's overvaluing the father so much that he had this dream in which he totally undervalued the father and saw the father as quite a reprobate. And Jung pointed out that this is one of those dreams that helps us know we have to know the context, the dreamer himself, in order to understand the dream. This dream is about a young man who was so idealizing of his father that he couldn't get on with his own life. So he dreamed of his father as quite a bad guy.
My father is driving away from the house in his new car. He drives very clumsily, and I get very annoyed over his apparent stupidity. He goes this way and that, forwards and backwards, and maneuvers the car into a dangerous position. Finally, he runs into a wall and damages the car badly. I shout at him in a perfect fury that he ought to behave himself. My father only laughs, and then I see he is dead drunk.
Such a dream might say to this young man that he needs to see his father as less than perfect. It also, on the other hand, for all of us, might raise the question of how effective are fathers in the lives of men today.
Well, I, have a great sympathy for fathers these days. I mean, mothers as well, but in this particular arena, the fact that a given personal father is supposed to somehow represent all of fatherness to his son is just a huge task. And I think we miss a great deal. I think we're very deprived because we have lost the capacity to share the fathering task with the larger community. Many of the American Indian tribes, of course, have cultures where there are rituals where the fathers, uncles, whatever, the men of the tribe will take the young men and initiate them over a period of time, maybe send them out to have a vision quest and come back and get a new name and now become officially men of the tribe and so on. But it does not mean that whole task of helping a young man to become firm in his sense of himself onto one personal father. I think it's a terrible loss that we don't do that.
To have the group carry the fathering principle releases the personal father from so much responsibility, and it also gives the young man an opportunity for a wider range of fathering, doesn't it?
It's interesting. I was listening to this last dream. I was remembering a dream. I was involved with an organization at one point, and I was in a car with a number of the father figures of that organization, and they were driving what I knew to be the wrong way on the freeway, and I had to talk them into stopping. And then they had to get in the back seat. Well, I took over driving the car and turned it around and went the other way. And it really was about having to find my own way to exercise my individuality in conflict with, at some level, in contrast with what the old fathers had been doing in my internal system. So it was a very important dream.
For a man to find his right relationship to the father, I guess the archetypal pattern is that the old king must die. But this relationship to the group of fathers reminds me also of another shadow element about the group for a man, that there's the whole psychology of gang.
Yes.
That we talked about some, right? About a young man's needing to identify with his peers, and because he...
I think for me, most of that, when it's age appropriate, which for me is mostly early adolescence, is about getting some separation from the mother. And I can't quite jump up to be with all the men yet, particularly in our culture where there's no framework for it. So I'll go hang out with the guys as a kind of transitional way of getting somewhat separated from home and mother, but I'm not quite old enough to step into the full male world yet. And then, of course, what happens frequently there is that a woman will come along and start to pick the men out of the gang one at a time. That kind of wedding bells are breaking up the old gang of mine, which is then age appropriate for the next stage, where you go out and you establish yourself as a couple in this society. But yes, I think that a great deal of the literal gang stuff that we so are upset by in our society today does have to do with the fact that we have not found any way to provide some real fathering for a huge number of young men, and they're not all minorities living in the slums of the country. I mean, that's happening everywhere.
A transition from the mother psychology to the masculine itself, right? And that gangs, from street gangs to Monday night football guys, right, to these fathers, the elders of the church or whatever, would be examples of that, right? That help pull a man out of the mother. I had an experience with a man that I wanted to tell you a dream, a man who's about 60, after realizing that his paralysis was at least in part related to his being caught somewhere between the conflict of having interjected his mother's idealism about what he should be and his father's tyrannical demands, which insisted of him perfection in every sort. And he had this wonderful dream that really released him and changed the course of his life. And I wanted to read you that dream and see what you think. He dreamed, "I am naked and carrying a knife. I climb the stairs of the castle to her bedroom, where I tear open the heavy red drapes and stab to death the man on the bed there. Blood is everywhere, on me, on the bed, on the walls. I descend the stairs then. I am told by some unseen voice to swim across the river. I do so. And on the other side, 3 workmen, ordinary workmen, give me clothes, and I go with them into the city." And I think this dream was so important. It was as if the man had to really strip himself and climb up into this castle or this tower of idealization of what a man should be, which would probably be like getting rid of the mother's animus power, wouldn't you guess?
Well, I would think also that it's a way in which if the mother has idealized him that way and given him such an idea that he's got to knock off the part of himself that has accepted that and has taken the father role.
Right.
But
right.
I mean, obviously he doesn't.
But he
it's like,
can't
what does
really
they call
fulfill
it? The false Oedipal victory. It's like, thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
And then I think the idea of having to go back and do something more mundane does break up the kind of psychological paralysis that I think so many men get stuck in when they're in that kind of dynamic. Mother thinks you're so wonderful, you can't do anything.
Yeah, yeah. And so his having to cross the river then and go to work with ordinary people advises this man that he really needs to leave this idealized place in which he stays and move into ordinary life, into the work world.
And to do what he can do.
Yeah. And that leads us to the archetype of the eternal boy in men's psychology, about which a lot is said, right?
Yes.
That
whether it's the Peter Pan syndrome or the puer aeternus, the idea that we stay unnecessarily young because we don't know how to move into the concrete tasks of life as it is, not in its idealized state, but in its dirtier, grittier, go out and find a way to struggle with something that leads to an accomplishment that you can feel good about.
And these dreams are, in general, come to men about the eternal youth if they're caught in that complex, that they dream of themselves as flying or being too high up. Isn't that the kind of classical symbol of being too high up?
I had one of my own I'd be glad to share with you. I can remember long time ago. I'm much better now. Way back. Right. But I was in a tree, and I was watching a bunch of young men and women play flag football. And I was deciding whose turn it was. I had a whistle, and I was telling everybody, where it all was supposed to happen. And then I had one of those little tiny pen knives like you would get on a keychain on a souvenir stand about this big. And I was like stabbing myself in the side with it. You can't do much damage, but, it looks a little bloody. And when I worked on it analytically, one of the things that I came up with my associations, the kind of inflated point of view I had, that I was above everybody else telling them all how they ought to be living their lives, and that the stabbing in the side I associated to Jesus being stabbed in the side. So here I was caught in the tree in a good Christ figure, but I wasn't dying. I was kind of pretending.
Right.
And so then we started, my analyst and I, talking about the tree as a mother symbol. So here I am caught in my mother symbol as the good eternal youth up there telling everybody how to live it, and I still didn't know how to get down on the ground and play ball myself. So that's how it happens.
Such an interesting dream, because not only does it emulate the Christ suffering figure, but also that kind of puncturing that would deflate this inflation, right?
But it's so false, it's almost staged that it doesn't really do the job.
And self-inflicted wounds I often think of as having to do with trying to really, that it points toward needing to really get in touch with the suffering, the pain, right?
Yeah,
you
real suffering, though.
Real suffering. You can't feel when you're up like that, or if you're in the top of the castle, there's no blood, there's no real feeling of being in life, really participating in life.
Well, sometimes the men in men's dreams is me, is the man who's dreaming. That's the man in that dream. Right. So there's a lot to be learned from me in that dream.
Yeah, how I'm behaving differently than I behave in everyday life.
Like, oh, I'm like that? Wow.
Right, is also very instructive, isn't it?
You can learn a lot from yourself in your dreams.
The people in your dream symbolize parts of yourself. For example, in Jung's dream, which we read earlier, the unknown brown-skinned savage in Jung's dream would symbolize a very primitive, undeveloped, wild side of Jung. While on the other hand, Siegfried would symbolize the very Germanic, well-developed hero in him. We often mistake the characters in our dreams for the people in our lives and make the dream concrete instead of symbolic. Most of the time, the dream uses the people in our everyday life to symbolize the actors in our inner drama. Dreams also correct for our persona. That is that particular image we have of ourselves, the mask we wear, the way we carry ourselves in our everyday life. For example, a businessman might consider himself very well put together, all suited and tied and cleaned up, as it were, and he might dream of a dirty, smelly, bedraggled-looking homeless person looking for a park bench, that part of himself that really can't be tied to a desk and suited up and that's lost. On the other hand, a young, shy, timid man might see himself in his dream as a French nobleman in charge of a government coup. The people in our dreams represent parts of ourselves. Remember that, and remember to take seriously what the dream tells us about qualities, attitudes, behaviors that we need to recognize and make correction for in our view of ourselves. In Marie-Louise von Frahn's classical book about the eternal youth, she tells a dream about a man being in such a high place.
I was on the crest of a mountain and was walking with a girl along the ridge. I did not know the girl. 2 men jumped from below and attacked me. During a wild wrestling match with them, they took me and threw me down into the gorge below. I had the feeling that I was lost, but there was a lonely fir tree in which I got caught and so did not fall to the bottom of the gorge.
So what could we say about that dream? That first of all, this shows the dreamer that he's very high up. He's on the crest of a mountain, so he's in an inflated place like an eternal youth.
And also, but he's got the possibility of going down on either side. He just needs to make a decision and get down.
Oh, and which side he's going to go,
it's like being on top of the fence. It's like sitting on the fence. It's like time to make a decision. So when you stay up there, because you can't really live your whole life on the top of the mountain.
Right, right. And that's one of the most severe problems about being gripped by the eternal youth is nothing is quite right. You know, you can't make the sacrifice that you have to make. If you go to the right side, you have to give something
That's
up.
right. Something has
or if
to
you go
die.
to the left, something has to die. So
Right.
the eternal youth wants to have it all. And he can't quite get the notion
Hangs
that
on
something...
to all his possibilities,
Yeah.
all his potential.
Yeah,
It's like, I'm not going to...
And living in a life of potential becomes pretty dried up.
Yes.
And, yeah.
It's a kind of pattern of withholding. And it's in a sense saying, I'm not going to give my seed. I'm not going to have my orgasm into life. I'm going to keep it all for me.
Yeah.
So I have all the potential, but none of the fruitfulness.
You're not getting it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another powerful figure in men's dreams and in men's lives, the wise old man. Do you think of I think of Jung's figure of Philemon is one such figure. How would such a man show up? We mentioned earlier like a shadow figure, that somebody very wise like Gandhi, right? Does it take a long time of developing to have a kind of wisdom figure appear?
No, I think what's really helpful a lot of times is to begin to realize that's one of those figures that can bridge both a kind of personal level. I'm thinking of a young man who has a good teacher or a coach who can provide some of that wise old man that is appropriate to that stage of development. You get a job or you go to college and you have, again, a good teacher or a good supervisor at work. Or maybe you're in the military and you get, a good sergeant or something like that. If you're lucky, maybe you have an uncle. So there's lots of ways in which personal figures can carry some of that. And it's not limited to age development. Probably one of the most famous ones in our big culture is from the Star Wars trilogy and the whole figure of Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. That this young Luke Skywalker gets these two figures in to help him evolve his own individuality. But mostly I think we think of them as someone that comes to us later in life. I don't think that has to happen that way. And in fact, I think we miss a lot because we don't keep our eye out for where these kind of wise old men, and they don't have to be old, can provide their wisdom. The source of wisdom, I think, is really the issue. And wisdom can come in many forms if you can learn to appreciate it.
I'm impressed that sometimes that wisdom figure comes out of working with what would be called a shadow figure.
Yes.
For example, somebody might start with a dream of a fool.
Yes.
And as he begins to make associations and work with that fool, it becomes a very important advisory kind of figure.
I do have one recurrent dream of maybe somebody that was close to that, who initially was similar to a college friend. who I admired a lot. And the only thing unusual about it was the fact that it was a black man. And the first time I can recall having this dream, he was standing, I believe, on the side of the road, and I went up to him, I believe, to ask for directions, and he didn't give me a direct answer, and he basically told me, you know, well, it's up to you, or it's for you to decide. And over the years, I had that particular figure reappearing in a number of other dreams.
That same black man?
Or somebody similar to him. Somebody. The only connection I would have with that black man would be with my college friend.
And was your college friend black?
Yes.
Yes.
And like I said, somebody that I would go to for advice, and he was a little bit older than I was, and you know, I respected him a lot, and so that's what probably set up that projection, and that's why probably I went to this figure for advice in the dream.
Right.
And but as he continued to reappear in the dreams over the years, it changed, and it became less and less my friend, and more an aspect of my own psyche, you know, an archetype, basically, that
had its own life, so
Yes.
the black man developed.
Yeah, I tried to work with him on a number of occasions in active imagination, but I never had as much success with that figure as I did, for example, with the anima figures that I've talked about.
What do you associate with your black friend? What are some qualities he has?
Well, his ability to work with people, his social skills. He was a master of everything that was practical. Whereas I was always I had my head in books, and I didn't look at the reality of the situation as much as he did. Although my friend also he's a great shadow figure, because he had a lot of what most people would consider to be bad habits, with his womanizing and gambling and things like that. You know, he was a typical bad boy.
Yeah,
very
he was worldly, yeah.
And so,
both good and bad, right? Yeah.
But no matter, you know, what you said about him, he was a really interesting character, and really exciting, and and very intelligent too.
Yeah.
That's another aspect of his personality, and he's still around today, and I understand he's a budding politician. I don't know how far he's gotten, but
he's developed in his own direction then, with a worldly kind of perspective.
Yes.
What would you associate with the black man archetypally? Like as it loses that
archetypally,
personal...
that's the only thing I can say is, you know, it's similar to me, you know, from my knowledge of Jung, of why he went back to Africa on the safaris, because he felt that Africa offered one of the best chances that he would have to investigate archetypal things on this planet, you know, because African cultures were closest to the primitive cultures that he knew about. And
where Western civilization hadn't formed it.
And to me, the black man appearing in my dream would be similar to what I just said about Jung. You know, some part of my personality that is closer to the earth, closer to the natural.
Right, the wild man in your own psyche, as it were, right?
In fact, I did read Bly's book, Iron John, and I tried to work with this black character as a kind of a wild man figure, and I tried to use it as that.
So there's some kind of sense in you that is a kind of conjunction between a shadow figure and a wisdom figure, right?
Yes, definitely.
That it's such a compensatory energy to your own introverted spiritual side, that it's so worldly, that it has a certain wisdom in it.
Don't worry about what so-called authority figures might say, because they don't know anything. That's basically a philosophy I remember from my actual friend. You know, he was very a strong person in the sense that he did things that he wanted to do, and he didn't really care about what it looked like to other people.
Yeah.
You know?
So the deepest wisdom from the black man in you is to trust your own authority.
The task at some level is to become something of, particularly I think in later life, of become a wise old man for yourself.
Right.
To have reflected on some of the vicissitudes and experiences of your life in a way that gives you a little bit of wisdom that perhaps you can pass on in a good, appropriate manner. You don't pound people over the head with it. Those aren't wise people. Those are obnoxious people. So, and then they grow up to be television preachers, right?
Yeah, careful. Hopefully that that sense of oneself as having an inner source of wisdom, actually that's the hope in working with the unconscious, is that one develops a relationship to your own internal wisdom, so that that can be integrated.
And it's not personal to you. You recognize that its source is something greater than you, and you're appreciative of it. You try to pass it on and to live it out, but you don't claim it for yourself because you know it is not yours. It's just a gift to you to be appreciated.
It is so important for men to record their dreams and to respect the dream as a source of wisdom and resolution to some of the basic problems in a man's everyday life, in this world, in this century. Jim talked to me about the value he has found in recording and working with his dreams.
And I do spend a lot of energy. I type up my dreams every few weeks, and I'm starting to collect a little dream journal now of everything that's typed.
Oh.
And this would enable me to go through them. And I think I started that ever since
the workshop.
The workshop that I attended with you, because I saw. In fact, the lady sitting next to me had done that, and I was so impressed by that. I said, "Boy, if she's doing this, why don't I? I can do that, right?" And
it's a certain way of valuing the material, isn't it? That really does.
Yeah, that's
make it seem like something that you keep.
The value that I saw expressed in not only her but other people in the workshop. It just kind of carried over to me, and it did me a lot of good. And I think it's a good habit to get into.
That's marvelous.
And when it comes to writing, it's still the writing that occurs when you're writing down a dream is some of the hardest writing you're ever going to write.
That's right.
Because
it's a whole different voice, right?
And you've got to overcome a lot of problems with directing your energy
and allowing it to be pieces, not to have the kind of stylized development we expect in literary pieces, right?
Or that, that's not been a problem for me because I'm too lazy to do that. But to actually get down and recall those images and rewrite them and get it down on paper and get those ideas so they're actually readable, and the memory process that goes into it, that's hard work.
Yeah, what's been a good image for me too is to think of Chagall's paintings, where there's no time, space, and he really allows images to just stand as they are, not having to make them make sensible time, space arrangement. And sometimes to allow that in remembering a dream of just the pieces.
Oh, I see.
Right? In a kind of Chagall-like juxtaposition that they don't have to line up into a rational story, right?
Yeah, I can do that very easily, but I guess what you're saying is not to feel guilty about that.
Dreams are a source of wisdom and insight which have been largely ignored by men in our culture. Dreams can be an invaluable tool for self-knowledge as well as knowledge about the world in which we live. Dreams put a man in touch with the unconscious, that eternal source of irrational yet truthful wisdom. We invite you to continue to join us in the ancient ritual of recalling and finding meaning in dreams.